In the mid-20th century, Kodak wasn't just a company, it was a global empire. With over 140,000 employees at its peak, Kodak dominated the photography industry, controlling nearly 90% of the US film market. From family vacations to wedding days, Kodak was there, capturing life's most cherished moments. For generations, Kodak was more than a brand. It was an experience. The phrase Kodak moment became part of everyday language, symbolizing snapshots of joy, nostalgia, and history. Millions of people trusted Kodak to preserve their most treasured memories, from childhood birthdays to world-changing events. Holding a Kodak camera was like holding a piece of the future, yet ironically, Kodak's future would be undone by its own innovation. During the golden era of film photography, Kodak's name was synonymous with quality, reliability, and innovation. They weren't just selling cameras, they were selling memories. But success can often lead to complacency, and as the digital revolution loomed, Kodak failed to ask a critical question. Are we truly in the film business, or are we in the memory business? This is the story of how Kodak went from an unstoppable force to a forgotten relic, and how one decision changed everything. For decades, Kodak stood at the pinnacle of the photography industry, a household name that defined how the world captured and preserved memories. But beneath the surface of its success lay a fatal flaw, a fundamental misunderstanding of its own business. Kodak believed it was in the film business, but in reality, it was in the memory business. This single misconception would eventually lead to the company's dramatic downfall. Kodak's empire was built on a simple yet highly profitable model: selling film. The cameras themselves were affordable, but the real money was in the endless rolls of film and the processing services that followed. Every photo taken meant another purchase, another development fee, another dependency on Kodak's ecosystem. This approach worked flawlessly for decades, securing the company's dominance. But what Kodak failed to recognize was that technology doesn't stand still. The way people interacted with photography was changing, and instead of embracing this shift, Kodak clung desperately to what had always worked. The company's leadership was fixated on protecting its film business at all costs. Innovation wasn't seen as an opportunity, it was seen as a threat. When Steve Sasson, a Kodak engineer, invented the first digital camera in 1975, it was a breakthrough that could have redefined the entire industry. But instead of seizing the opportunity, Kodak's executives buried it. They feared that digital photography would cannibalize their lucrative film sales. Instead of leading the transition, they chose to suppress it, believing they could slow down the inevitable. But change doesn't wait for permission. As the digital age gained momentum, competitors like Sony, Canon, and Nikon embraced the new technology, offering consumers a way to take photos instantly with no film required. People no longer wanted to be limited by physical rolls of film or the hassle of developing pictures. They wanted speed, convenience, and the ability to share their memories effortlessly. Kodak, however, remained stuck in the past, too focused on protecting an outdated revenue model instead of innovating for the future. The consequences of this rigid mindset were catastrophic. As digital cameras became more popular, film sales plummeted. The once invincible Kodak found itself struggling to stay relevant, watching as its competitors surged ahead. Even when Kodak finally attempted to pivot toward digital photography, it was too late. The company had lost valuable time, and the industry had already moved on. Kodak's mistake wasn't just a failure to innovate, it was a failure to understand its true purpose. It had never been about film, it had always been about helping people preserve and share their memories. If Kodak had embraced digital photography from the start, it could have transitioned smoothly, using its brand power to lead the industry instead of falling behind it. But by stubbornly clinging to the past, Kodak ensured its own decline. This wasn't just a business misstep, it was a cautionary tale. In a world where technology evolves rapidly, refusing to adapt isn't just risky, it's a death sentence. In 1975, a young Kodak engineer named Steve Sasson created something that should have propelled the company into the future, the world's first digital camera. It was a crude device by today's standards, bulky, slow, and producing grainy black and white images, but it was revolutionary. For the first time, a camera could capture an image without film. Instead, it converted light into a digital file, storing it on a cassette tape. It was the birth of digital photography, a moment that should have cemented Kodak's position as a leader for generations to come. Instead, it became one of the greatest missed opportunities in business history. When Sasson presented his invention to Kodak's executives, the response was not excitement, it was fear. The company had built an empire on film sales, and a technology that eliminated the need for film was seen as a direct threat. Kodak wasn't just selling cameras. They were selling a cycle, film, processing, printing, an ecosystem that customers had no choice but to buy into. Digital photography shattered that model, and rather than embracing this innovation, Kodak chose to bury it. The company shelved the project, suppressing its own breakthrough, convinced that if they ignored digital photography, it wouldn't become a problem. But technology doesn't wait. As the years passed, other companies saw what Kodak refused to. Digital cameras were the future. Sony, Canon, and Nikon began developing their own digital models, improving on Sasson's early prototype and making them smaller, faster, and more accessible. Consumers, always eager for convenience, started shifting away from film. By the time Kodak finally acknowledged digital photography as a legitimate market, it had already lost its first-mover advantage. The very technology Kodak had pioneered was now in the hands of its competitors. The irony was undeniable. Kodak had revolutionized photography once before, making it accessible to everyday people with its "You press the button, we do the rest" slogan. It had thrived by simplifying photography and making it available to the masses. But when faced with another revolutionary moment, Kodak hesitated. Instead of shaping the digital era, it resisted it, clinging to a business model that was destined to become obsolete. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, digital photography had taken over. Film sales plummeted, and Kodak scrambled to adapt. They released digital cameras, but they were playing catch-up in a game they had invented. They made desperate moves, acquiring companies, investing in new strategies, but the damage was done. Kodak had waited too long. What should have been their greatest triumph had become their downfall. The story of Kodak's digital camera is more than just a business failure. It's a lesson in the danger of complacency. Innovation doesn't wait for those unwilling to embrace it. Kodak had the future in its hands and let it slip away. In the end, it wasn't digital photography that destroyed Kodak. It was Kodak's own refusal to evolve. By the late 1990s, the photography landscape was undergoing a seismic shift. Digital photography, once a niche concept, was now becoming the norm. Consumers no longer wanted to wait days to develop film or pay for prints they hadn't seen. They wanted instant access, the ability to view, delete, and share images on the spot. Technology was moving fast, and digital cameras were becoming smaller, cheaper, and more powerful with every passing year. While Kodak hesitated, its competitors were sprinting ahead. Companies like Sony, Canon, and Nikon recognized the potential of digital photography and poured resources into research, development, and aggressive marketing. They weren't burdened by a legacy film business to protect, so they embraced innovation fully. Sony's Cybershot series gained massive popularity, while Canon and Nikon refined their digital single-lens reflex (DSLR) cameras, capturing both amateur and professional markets. Kodak, meanwhile, found itself trapped between two worlds. Still heavily invested in film and hesitant to disrupt its own revenue streams, the company responded slowly and half-heartedly to the changing tides. When it did release digital cameras, they were often too late or lacked the features and vision of their competitors. Even as consumers were rapidly moving to digital, Kodak was still pushing film, still clinging to the past. The disruption didn't stop with cameras. The early 2000s brought smartphones, combining digital photography with mobile technology. Now, People could not only take photos instantly but also edit and share them in real time. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and later Snapchat and TikTok transformed photography into a social experience. Photos weren't just stored in albums. They were uploaded to the cloud, shared across the globe, and available at the tap of a screen. Kodak had no place in this new ecosystem. Its business model, built on physical products and analog processes, simply couldn't compete in a world where everything was becoming digital, mobile, and immediate. The value had shifted from selling film to selling convenience, connectivity, and creative tools. Kodak's refusal to adapt wasn't just a strategic misstep, it was a failure to understand the future of human behavior. By the time Kodak fully committed to digital, the market had already evolved beyond it. They weren't just behind, they were irrelevant. And so, a company that once led the world in innovation found itself on the sidelines, watching a revolution it could have led, but instead tried to ignore. As the digital revolution accelerated, Kodak scrambled to catch up. The company that had once defined the photography industry began to release its own line of digital cameras, hoping to reclaim relevance. But these efforts were slow, inconsistent, and lacked the bold vision required to lead in a rapidly changing market. Kodak had missed its window. While competitors had spent years perfecting digital technology and building ecosystems around it, Kodak was still trying to retrofit its aging business model to fit a new world it didn't fully understand. In a series of desperate moves, Kodak invested heavily in digital printing, online photo sharing platforms, and even tried to pivot into consumer electronics. At one point, it attempted to position itself as a leader in digital imaging patents, hoping to license its intellectual property to competitors who had already overtaken it. But none of these efforts could undo the damage. The brand was no longer seen as innovative, it was seen as outdated, a symbol of what used to be. Each new move felt like a reaction, not a strategy. Consumers had moved on, and so had the industry. By 2012, the inevitable happened. Kodak filed for bankruptcy. It was a stunning fall for a company that had once been a pillar of American business and innovation. The bankruptcy wasn't just a financial event, it was a cultural one. It represented the collapse of an era, the failure of a giant that had all the tools to succeed but lacked the will to change. Kodak's downfall became a case study in business schools, a warning to future leaders about the dangers of clinging to the past while ignoring the future. The irony of Kodak's story is almost poetic. This was a company that had pioneered photography for the masses, that had made capturing memories accessible to everyone. Its legacy was built on innovation, on transforming the way people saw and remembered the world. And yet, when the next wave of transformation arrived, Kodak resisted it. It protected its film business so fiercely that it ended up destroying the very thing it had worked so hard to build. Today, Kodak still exists, but it's no longer a household name. It lives on as a shadow of its former self, dabbling in niche technology and imaging services, respected for its history but largely irrelevant in the present. Its name evokes nostalgia, not leadership. It's remembered not just for what it created, but for what it failed to embrace. The fall of Kodak isn't just a business story, it's a powerful reminder that success, no matter how great, is never guaranteed in a world that never stops evolving. Kodak's story is more than a tale of technological disruption. It's a profound lesson about identity, innovation, and the danger of standing still in a moving world. One of Kodak's greatest mistakes was misunderstanding what business it was truly in. The company believed it was in the film business, when in reality, it was in the memory business. People didn't buy film because they loved film. They bought it because it preserved their memories. The medium was secondary. The emotional connection was what mattered most. This failure to understand their core value proposition blinded Kodak to the forces of change. And they're not alone. Blockbuster once dominated home entertainment but fell victim to a similar mindset, refusing to believe that digital streaming could ever replace physical rentals. Nokia led the mobile phone market until it dismissed the power of smartphones and operating systems like iOS and Android. These companies didn't collapse because they lacked resources or talent. They collapsed because they failed to adapt when it mattered most. Innovation isn't optional in a world where technology evolves by the minute. It's a necessity. But innovation alone isn't enough. It must be embraced, nurtured, and aligned with a company's true purpose. Kodak had innovation in its hands with the digital camera. But instead of using it to lead the next wave, it saw it as a threat to its current success and buried it. In doing so, Kodak chose short-term security over long-term survival. Businesses today operate in a landscape of constant disruption: AI, automation, renewable energy, remote work, the creator economy. Change is no longer an occasional visitor, it's a permanent resident. Companies that thrive in this environment are those willing to question themselves, reinvent their models, and take bold risks. They understand that clinging to yesterday's wins is a recipe for tomorrow's irrelevance. The legacy of Kodak is a cautionary tale, but it's also a guidepost. It tells us that no company, no matter how dominant, is immune to disruption. It reminds us that leadership isn't just about protecting what's worked, it's about anticipating what comes next. So the question every business must ask itself is this: are we truly in the business we think we're in? Because knowing your purpose is the first step toward evolving with the times. And if you're not evolving, you're already falling behind. Will your business embrace the future, or will it become the next Kodak?